So, welcome everyone to this session, which we call Talking Points with Capstone. For those coming in late, and for me to let you know what Talking Points is, because we've had several Talking Points. And if you do like what we talk about today, then maybe you should go back and access some of the past sessions that we've presented through Talking Points. So, this session is called Cult versus Culture. And we'll come to this just in a minute. Just quickly to let you know a bit about Capstone People Consulting. I'm Dr. Sujaya Banerjee, and I'm the founder CEO of Capstone People Consulting. This is an 8-year-old startup. We work with over 180 companies, both in India and internationally, in the space of leadership, capability building, culture, and change. We represent Duke Corporate Education globally and work together with them on very large global clients, also in the space of leadership, workplace culture, and change. While workplace culture has been thematically very important in the context of achieving business, but particularly in the post-COVID era, there is a renewed interest in wanting to deliberately and intentionally build culture, and in which context this conversation that we're having here today becomes really useful. So, our conversation today is regarding cult versus culture. It's called Cult versus Culture. And we do have some degree of interaction during the conversation. So, do keep the chat active by responding to questions that I may ask as we go along so that we can make this more interesting and more interactive. So, cult versus culture. I'm going to start by asking you a couple of questions. So, on your marks, get set. So the first question is, what is the difference between a loyal employee and a blind follower? So questions to ask yourself, really. So what is the difference between a loyal employee and a blind follower? Does anyone want to take to the chat and try and give me your perspective on what is the difference between the two? And I know there is a huge ask for loyal employees, and we must know the difference between the two. In fact, I know a lot of organizations struggle with the concept of the loyal employee. We need to perhaps redefine what is indeed a loyal employee. But what is the difference between a loyal employee and a blind follower? So please take to the chat to be able to answer this question as I move to the next one, which is what is the, all right, I have Hemant already responding to this saying blind follower goes with the wind without understanding. Loyal employee applies and acts in line with the culture and rules. Yeah. So you kind of hit the nail. And it's so important to be able to make out this difference. It's right at the center of our conversation here today. Manjusha is saying a loyal employee voices the truth, and that which is so important and so required within organizations. Question number two, yeah, what is one trait you would associate with a cult? So if you were thinking or you realize that you have a cult around you, what strikes you about that place which makes you feel that it's a cult? Or what experiences or stories have you heard about which make you feel that that organization is a cult? And Hemant's saying there's bullying and underestimating in a cult, which is so true. Anyone else who wants to say what is cult to you when we say cult? What are you thinking about? Rahul saying royal employees aligned with the mission and purpose, and is a blind follower, goes with the flow, and tell us what you think is yeah, what is the cult? Us versus them mentality. And Ranjani, I'm so glad you're raising this because we're going to talk a bit about the us versus them kind of behavior that actually reduces a sense of loyalty for the organization. Question number three, what one trait would you associate with culture? And some of you did start mentioning that already, but what is going through your mind when you say culture? What do you really mean is one trait that you expect employees to demonstrate in a culture? Other than being loyal, what do you define a culture as? Alignment in all situations is what Hemant is saying. All right. Anything else that strikes you about what could be a culture? Okay, I'll let you come to that. And I'm going to straight off at the start try and strike a difference between cult and culture for us so we know what it is that we're actually talking about. So when I'm alluding to cult, what I'm actually trying to say is an organization which typically rallies around perhaps a charismatic or iconic leader who may have created the organization. It could also be a group of people who have basically been there through the evolution of the organization, through the early stages of the organization. And so there's this very strong sense of accomplishment, achievement, hours that they feel towards the organization. They define their way of doing things. And as they evolve and as they grow and they need to now add to the tribe and bring in more people within the organization, what they seek as alignment, what they seek as alignment from the group of people who join the organization often turns into bullying, can turn into an ask us versus them kind of a situation. There is little dexterity to be able to entertain what people may want from the organization, what people may expect from the organization. There isn't voice, and there is an interest for the voice because it's either our way or the highway. These environments are created organically. They happen and they create organically. These are also places where there's a shared sense of values, beliefs, and assumptions. But these values, beliefs, and assumptions could be highly outdated. They may not be in sync with the kind of talent that you want to bring within the organization. Fear is a big motivation in a cult, right? Which is basically fear of not fitting in, fear of not aligning, fear of not standing up to expectations, fear of consequence. Therefore, very low psychological safety is a great indication of being and perhaps belonging to a cult. Oftentimes, the cult could be led by a founder or by someone for whom people around have sort of blind loyalty, unquestioning loyalty, which could really mean many challenges for the organization, especially in the context of decision making, in the context of problem solving, in the context of having a strong command and control culture, where there's this huge alignment for this kind of culture. And those who don't fit in or who don't align to this or who want to share an alternate perspective, opinion, or a new style of working would normally struggle to survive in such a workplace. There's a very interesting article by MIT Sloan recently, which talked about one of the challenges of being able to have people who are homegrown inside an organization. I thought it was a very interesting perspective, especially at times where most organizations are struggling with retention. So, what the article was alluding to was um, the fact that when you have homegrown talent that has stayed with the organization too long, um, two things will happen. A, you will struggle with innovation or new thinking. And B, they will become the perpetrators of the previous culture or the old culture or the culture they experienced when they came into the organization. And so driving culture change becomes so much more difficult because you have so many custodians of the old thinking. So this just aggravates the situation. It's an interesting perspective, so I brought it in. I don't mean to say that when you retain employees for a long time, you're going to have a challenge with necessarily creating a cult, but they can aggravate the cult if it already exists, and that's the point that I'm trying to basically draw your attention to. So a cult is a place where there is unquestioning obedience to the leader, or through the ideology of the organization. And that's what I meant when I said our way or my way of being able to do things. Huge premium on aligning to that. And isolation from dissent, which is there is no space for an alternate perspective. Um, the toxic work environments that everyone's talking about on the internet and in other articles is exactly what we're talking about, like this hustle culture where most things are done to be able to seek approval from whoever is this iconic leader or this group of leaders. And therefore, no one's going to tell the emperor that he doesn't have clothes off his back. So there's no mechanism of being able to provide feedback upwards or having leaders to be able to reflect on what they could do differently. They're very solid, sort of monolithic organizations where you can't break through the bureaucracy to be able to start bringing in some lit movement. So even if there is a lot of lip service for change, or there's lip service to use current terminology like agility and so on, more often than not, these organizations remain very difficult to be able to sway, to get the elephant to dance because they are so deep rooted in what they believe to already be right. A brand cult is a good example, and I'm not going to call out those brands here in our conversation, but you do know
Yes.
there's very large, successful technology and other companies, where there is our way of being able to do things. And you can see that a lot of them have had to go back to the drawing board to reinvent and drive change to be able to remain sustainable, in terms of performance. And there've been a whole host of them who have just driven themselves away. So, culture, on the other hand, is around shared values, which means that there are shared values, beliefs, assumptions. It encourages critical thinking, which means you can have an alternate perspective, you can bring in a new idea, you can disagree positively, adapts to change, which is interested in being able to keep up with what is the requirement in the context of the business, is purpose driven but flexible. So it does have a purpose, but it's flexible. And cultures are not etched in stone. They ought to be flexible in the context of what are the new emerging business requirements. And therefore, which behaviors do you need to be able to demonstrate so that you're able to achieve what the requirement of the business are? To be able to call these out, to be able to call out and accept that there are areas that we are not up to the mark on. For example, agility, which everyone talks about, collaboration that organizations talk about. I mean, it's talked about all the time, whereas we will insist on certain structures, we will insist on working in a particular way, we will not question behaviors within the organization, we will not even have shared strategies to hold leaders accountable for. So there would be no mechanisms to be able to break the silos, but we still talk about it. So purpose driven but flexible, understanding the fact that culture will change depending on what it is that we require in the context of the business, in the context of the environment, and I dare say in the context of the kind of talent that you are attracting to the organization, and where you want to make talent perennial and you want to make talent sustainable. Example, of course, are open source communities, collaborative communities, merit-based organizations. All of this, even organizations that are attempting to be able to become this. I mean, culture is always work in progress. So even organizations that are attempting to become more collaborative are very powerful in terms of being able to achieve momentum for the kind of behaviors that they value or need the most in the context of business. When culture tips into cult, what should we watch out for? And we talked about cults which require to become culture. Now I'm asking the other way around, when culture tips into cult, what should we actually have to watch out for? I think on early warning signs is when you start seeing the us versus them mentality, where you're so doggedly guarding what the organization really stands for that you don't want to entertain alternate perspectives. And when you see groups of people come in, and which is not uncommon, by the way, even as we speak, where we have a larger group of millennials and Gen Zs coming into the workplace, and there's already an emerging us versus them mentality. Early signs that we need to question the way in which we've done things in the past, and that maybe for a growing majority of talent within the organization, if something is not seeming palatable, if something is appearing unfair, if they have an alternate perspective and voice, that should be at least listened to. Punishment for dissent, which is basically getting fired for questioning, or and all this sounds really atrocious, but it's true in some organizations. There's a lot of resentment for people who ask questions. One of the reasons why a lot of employees do not give honest feedback in the voice of employee or employee surveys inside the organization is because they don't believe that these are anonymous. And they do believe there will be a comeback in the instance that you give some feedback about the leadership, or you talk about the culture in some manner. If you talk about your dissatisfaction in some manner, there is a huge fear of punishment. And as a result of that, you have situations where organizations have won huge awards for having a great culture, for being a great employer, and in the same breath, they are experiencing attrition of 30 to 40%. So punishment to dissent is a very significant challenge, and most organizations need to start watching out for that, because if people don't give you honest feedback, it means they experience a cult. Leader worship. Now, on one hand, when I do work around leadership and leadership capability building, there is a huge amount of work around becoming the leader, the desirable leader, the likable leader, the empathetic leader, the compassionate leader, everything to make the leader really attractive. And on the other hand, what you have in cults is that the leader cannot be questioned. And so it becomes so difficult to drive change in organizations where they become leaders are untouchables, in the sense that you can't do anything with them, that they are the way they are, and you're going to have to live and suffer them. this leader worship, yeah, which still exists in many organizations, also not uncommon in founder-driven organizations, can be a bane for being able to get any great work done. Such organizations will not have a culture for innovation or change. They will definitely struggle in terms of performance, leave a lot of money on the table. In the 21st century, your key differentiator is culture and not your strategy. And so, for organizations who have a blind leader worship culture, there are huge challenges there because you're not going to see even any, sort of express change agenda ever work because no one's going to tell the emperors that they don't have clothes off their back. So, the leader worship, particularly in times of constant change and disruption, can create many challenges and will soon make the organization feel like a cult to people who are experiencing such cultures. So, question to all of you on the call here today. Has your workplace ever felt cultish? Yeah, has anyone experienced a cult? Anyone who's on the call, have you experienced a cult-like organization, and why? Meaning, in the sense, give us some more inputs. I do have some descriptions of cult already in the chat: micromanagement, undermining work, manipulating views, verbal abuse, all of these. But have you personally experienced a cult, and what struck you the most when you actually saw one? Anyone has a view, a story? It'd be really interesting to be able to get that. I just joined one, okay, but yes, I just joined, okay, but I have experienced one: hero worship. Yeah, which just simply means no one can tell the hero, the boss, anything. I experienced one at one time, and I was going to have a word with this leader the next day. And the previous night, I get a call from people from the leadership team saying, two things that I must tell you about him because you're having a call with him tomorrow is, he just doesn't like anyone who speaks too much English. So, can you bring in Hindi in your conversations? Because if you don't bring in Hindi in your conversations, there will be a big bias. Now, very interestingly, I speak in 6 Indian languages and I don't have a problem. I could outspeak him in a vernacular language, but it's very interesting to know that. And so, bias is a very significant one. The second thing they told me was very interesting, and I don't know what they wanted me to do about that, but they said he doesn't like women. And I said, this is very interesting because I can't do anything about that. And it's interesting that you've lined up someone to talk to him who is indeed a female. So um, he said, yeah, you're going to have to work around that one. He has a bias against women, particularly women in senior positions. I mean, imagine having to brief someone that I have someone here who does not like people who speak in English. I did ask the reason for that. And the reason that was provided was because he himself comes from tier two, three cities, has a Hindi medium background, and therefore has resentment for people who speak in English. And then, of course, the other part being, you'll have to navigate this piece because he doesn't have a great opinion about women. So, very interesting, very cult, yeah, which is getting a call to be able to let you know that this is how the leader feels or the leader thinks. Um, I got a couple of others here. Hemant saying I worked for an MNC at leadership level between 22 and 20 and 22. Finally became a victim of the same. And it's not uncommon, it's just not uncommon to experience this. I've got Kundan saying I realized very closely during 18 to 23. I have seen this hero being threatened by powerful women. Yes, Mukti, and especially women who are articulate, women who are confident, people who are not intimidated with power. All of these are great signs to be able to know that you're dealing with a cult. But the first one to really spot for me is the hero worship for leaders. Yeah, blind hero worship. A lot of people pretending to have that hero worship. A lot of people looking highly concerned and anxious about that hero worship. But there is hero worship nevertheless. And if you're not voicing the same or you're not showing the same, there is concern and anxiety around in terms of perhaps your likability if you're not showing blind hero worship. It's a definite one. I think the anxiety and fear of people around these leaders is another very important giveaway sign. But important to think about what is therefore a cult versus culture. Some of you captured some of these behaviors, but I'll try and recap these for you. So if you did work for one, you'll see that micromanaging is one of the behaviors that you'll see around for leaders. And it's largely because they are overemphasizing on alignment. And they do want to know whether you're doing it their way, not just whether you're doing it, but you're doing it their way. And if it's not happening their way, they're not very pleased with that. Now, you may argue that if an employee is new within the organization, would we not orient them or align them to our way? And that is true. That to begin with, that ought to be the way in which you teach people the job. But especially as people start becoming more senior, or the lateral hires who come into the organization can't be treated the same as people who are new or are trainees. So it's so important to be able to use the ask and tell spectrum, which is ask more questions, ask what they feel, ask what they think. And that's how you're going to, particularly in the 21st century, get people's ideas integrated, get people's views integrated, get another way of doing things. One big advantage of being able to laterally hire from competition is that you come to know their way. And maybe their way may be better than our way, in which case, we try and adapt and adjust. So adaptive learning, constant adaptive learning is the name of the game. Micromanaging does not allow that. It does not allow for the elbow room, does not allow for people to experiment, does not allow for people to even make mistakes. So micromanaging can be very destructive to be able to infuse new ideas, infuse new suggestions, infuse new ways of being able to do things. The biggest advantage of being able to bring in new talent within the organization is lost because the first thing that they're taught to do is my way and no other way. um, Getting defensive from feedback. And this is another big sign, right? You try and tell people who are in authority something, they're so offended. They're wondering how you have the courage to be able to do this. And why don't you just learn your job? And why don't you just do what you've been asked to do? We didn't ask you for feedback. So this basically pushback on feedback, even the one that you're trying to offer, is a great sign for you to know that this is a cultish kind of a work environment. Waiting for the perfect moment, which is really an environment of, revenge, pettiness, wanting to come back, wanting to fix you, a lot of those kind of environments, which you do see across the board and across levels, and you're really amazed at the pettiness. Prioritizing urgency over strategy. So you really wonder what is indeed the strategy of the organization because they constantly seem to be firefighting. Avoiding difficult conversations. They really don't want to talk about your career. They're not actually interested in building it. They're not interested in talking about a conflict because they don't want to resolve it and get their heads into it. They probably don't even know how to resolve a conflict. So they don't want to know about the difficult conversations. There's a process not working out. The place is too bureaucratic. You need some mentoring and no one's actually helping you. They don't want to know about all this. And if you come in too often with these difficult conversations, then you're seen as a bit of a bother. Speaking without considering impact. This is just the leeway of being able to say what they'd like to say, including being highly abusive, being very personal sometimes in the comments that are being made. So this etiquette of what we can say and can't say in the workplace doesn't seem to exist in cults. Saying yes when your gut says no. So in an environment like this, you'll find yourself saying yes when you want to say no. And so, you can't really be yourself. You can't be your authentic self. And your authentic self is not like, so everyone's pretending, everyone has a mask to be able to survive. Holding on to past mistakes. So if something happened some months ago that will get repeated again, it get told in front of other people. This whole unforgiving kind of revengeful kind of environment. And when you experience that from the immediate manager, you really don't have hope to be able to see it change anywhere. We have Sajita saying, I've been told so many times you cannot ask questions in open forum if you do not discuss with me first, even if it's an idea. So, Sajita, why am I not surprised? I mean, I do know of environments where there is huge feeling of offense. If in a meeting you came up and said something, or you spontaneously had a point of view, it's treated as you wanting to steal voice, you wanting to make yourself be seen, you wanting to stand out over the boss, a lot of insecurity. So you're actually alluding to the vast insecurity that you see among people across levels, within the organization. I actually have a very funny incident to be able to share with you. There was someone I was talking to in a very large organization, and this is before we had Capstone. And he happened to mention to me, I met him, he was an ex-colleague, and I met him on the airport, and he got talking about where he was flying to because he had a town hall. And he said, well, I have a calendar of town halls, and I make sure that I go out to the remotest places to talk to my employees. So I'm very particular about voice. I'm very particular about connecting with people. I want to keep people updated. I want them to, feel included. And so I have a calendar and I fly out a couple of days in a month every year to just reach out to my employees and to be able to talk to them. Now, I was fascinated and I'm always looking for a best practice. So I said, "Oh, this is fabulous. Can you tell me more about what you do?" He said, "Yeah, these are like 90 minutes and I get groups of people. I talk to, new employees. I talk to people who've been there for a long, there's a town hall, there's a separate group of just leaders that I address so I can keep inspiring them and so on." Everything sounded really good. And I said, "All right, so describe your town hall. Like what really happens in the town hall?" He said, "Oh, normally I give them updates about the organization and so on. I let them know what else is happening, get them excited about the future." I said, "Oh, that's great." And I said, "And what about people grievances? If people have a challenge or they want to ask a question?" He said, "Oh, they're not, you mean HR questions? You mean HR kind of questions?" I said, "Well, whatever questions they want to ask." No, no, no. There is a slide I have right at the start. I keep this constructive. So I have a slide right at the start, letting people know all the questions they can't ask in the town. And then I conduct the town hall and then I tell them what I want. So this is a one-sided town hall. And he sees it as a best practice. And he's delighted to have a calendar to go around doing this with the first slide that tells people, don't ask me questions to do with, I don't know, if you don't like the work environment, you don't like certain policies, you want to ask whether something can be changed. You're not allowed to talk about any of that. You're not even allowed to make suggestions. And he says, "Well, there are different forums for that. I don't want them disturbing my town hall." And this is the CEO making the rounds doing a town hall. So often these practices are just checks in the box. They're not actually happening in the way in which you really need them to happen. And when you're in a cult versus an environment that upholds culture, more often than not, you will see a lot of pretense rather than essence to best practices. I have some more comments I want to take here. Um, you know, I've got Mukti saying they then start sugar dadding those who worship them. Sorry if the comment is outrageous, hence written in private. Okay. I'm sorry. I just read it out because I'm seeing it while talking here. Even if permitted to ask questions, only selected questions are taken up for response. And Kundan, at least selected questions. I just called out a story when no questions are allowed and none at all. And they apparently are
That,
to be
that's what
asked
I
something.
experienced, Dr. Sujaya, in my previous assignment.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm sharing
Yeah.
because the CEO was very particular that nobody would like to ask finance about the marketing, everything.
Yeah.
Only about the CEO will speak and he will speak, and the question should be raised in line with whatever he has spoken like that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's what my experience is there.
Yes, yes, and that's not
Mhm.
uncommon at all. I just shared
Mhm.
a story myself. So we've got Hemant saying that changed the PPTs for several ties and later saying that work is not a priority. Sorry, I didn't get that, Hemant. Didn't get your comment. Do you want to unmute and tell me what that comment is?
Yes, actually,
The
madam, we
PPTs.
were
Yeah.
working in employee relations area where
Okay.
the proposal came to make permanent of some people who were already working in a core area.
Hmm. Hmm.
People working in core area legally has to be made permanent if they are working continuously. That is the
Hmm.
one of the strategic call in any organization has to take to avoid the possible industrial unrest or
Yeah.
industrial.
Yeah.
Now we prepare the plan, program, structure,
Hmm.
formats, and then it keeps on changing. Then 7, 8 times it has happened, and finally said, no, that's not a priority. You look
Yeah.
for the other job. So if the leadership team is involving there inside, right from the
Yeah.
beginning to the end,
Yeah.
and then at the grassroots level, we prepared all these things and about to implement, and
Yeah.
this message comes. What
Yeah.
does
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Okay, I think we've all had experiences in this space, and so we do know what cults can feel like. So, building a culture, avoiding building a cult. What can you do to be able to do that? Clearly, leaders need to prioritize transparency over control. I mean, cultures get built when you're able to begin with articulate what your culture is, which is what do you uphold in the way you work together? Yeah, what do we really uphold? What is our purpose? What are we trying to achieve here? And why are these behaviors useful in the context of the work we do, the industry we belong in? What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve this year? what do we really stand for as a leadership, right? How can you become a leader within the organization? What kind of self-leadership do we really require within this organization? What is performance within our organization? Yeah, who are high performance? What is the description of high performance? And I'm asking these simple questions because in a lot of organizations, no two leaders have the same response to this. Right. And so the alignment that you really need is right at the top of the organization, starting from in alluding to and upholding transparency over control. Reward curiosity and not conformity. So conformity is very limited. It remains and keeps us where we already were. The curiosity is what's going to get us ahead, and particularly in the new times where you don't know where your next curved ball is coming from, where these are highly disruptive times, we often find ourselves in places where we've never been before. And the only way to be able to resolve issues is if we keep the organization curious. So avoiding the cult requires this transformation, which is from control to transparency and from conformity to curiosity. For individuals, it's extremely important to spot the red flags early in the game. If the environment is not for you, then you're not going to flourish. And if you're not going to flourish, this is not going to be useful. I don't know how many of you pursue positive psychology, but there is an outstanding thought leader called Martin Seligman who talks about positive psychology. And one of the lines that he uttered in one of his conversations has stayed with me forever. And he says that the pursuit of of all business, the pursuit of business, right? The pursuit of enterprise, the pursuit of work, the pursuit of contribution. Yeah, all of it is at the service of human well-being. So the final measure or metric of everything in the world is, are people happy? And if they're not happy, then we failed, then we've not done what we could have easily done. And I know it sounds really profound, beautiful. And for some of us, we're wondering whether we are eluded in terms of believing, or we're delusional that we think that there can be a world such as this. But if we have this philosophy, we can certainly build it within organizations. And for individuals, the only advice is that if you spot these red flags that we just spoke about, then this is not going to be a place where you can flourish, unless you are joining the cult to be able to have blind followership, and you don't mind giving up your independence. This is just a source of livelihood for you, and you don't care how you spend your 8 to 10 hours every day. This is very, very damaging for mental health, and it's hardly the way in which you should be earning a living. And it's the opposite of what I just called out right now, that all human endeavor is in the service of human well-being. And so if you don't experience well-being, then it's not worth your while to be doing what you're doing. Culture is a garden, and I've put a plant here because this is basically heliotropy. All of us learned this in class 8 or 9, or maybe even earlier. And I teach everywhere in the world, and this lesson's been taught. The heliotropy lessons been learned either in the 5th standard, 6th standard, or 7th standard, everywhere in the world. And so we already know this. Yeah, we already know this. So Heliotropy is the act of the plants growing in the direction of light, which means that human beings are like plants. They only grow in the direction of light, light being a metaphor for positivity. So unless the environment's positive, unless the boss is positive, unless the colleagues are positive, it's very, very difficult to get anything great in an organization. Most of us are leaving money on the table by not working on creating this. And we're going to try and talk a bit about how do you create this culture of flourish. So culture is a garden, and that's what I want you to remember. If there is a key takeaway from this conversation here today, is how do I recognize a culture? Culture feels like a garden. Healthy cultures thrive on trust. And I know trust is a big one. Some of us struggle with trust in our personal lives. But it's the intuitive feeling of trust that you have for people who are in positions of power within the organization. It's the intuitive trust you have for the intent of the organization, the intuitive trust you have for the organization's ability to feel vulnerable about areas where they're not so great, and they're open to be able to drive change. So that is what evokes trust. Vulnerability evokes trust. Humanizing yourself in an organization evokes trust. Cults thrive on fear and on creating heroes who are far from heroes. They're as human and as vulnerable as everyone else, but they just won't show it. And so culture is a garden, and it's about being able to thrive on trust. They thrive on healthy trust. Cults ask you to fit in. Cultures help you belong. And so, no one's been carved to fit in into any organization straight away. Organizations have to understand and realize that and align individuals to help them belong in organizations by being able to see the human side of enterprise. Yeah, the humaneness in the enterprise, the empathy in the enterprise, the ability to help in the enterprise. And that needs to be experienced across levels. It's not about top leadership trying to express love and support. This is something that you need to experience at different parts of the organization. I can't begin to tell you how close to my heart this talk is because, as someone who's worked in the business world for over 30 years, I can tell you that, way back, right, we went to work with a skip in our step. Yeah, we went to work because we so looked forward to getting up and going to work. And I know these are different times. And, some of you may argue saying it was just such a blessing to even have a great job with a large organization. And they were fewer and far between. But what they enabled doing to people who actually came in and worked with them, and I know many of them who were in the same vein, and many people who I talked to from that time who feel the same way, which is whatever happened to that skip in the step, whatever happened to loving the workplace, whatever happened about meeting some of the best people in your life at your workplace, whatever happened to finding your best teachers, not necessarily in school, not necessarily in college, but in the workplace. And so there is just so much to be done as far as workplaces are concerned. They're actually meant to be places of flourish. Yeah. And so places you belong to and places you miss the most when you're not there. So transforming a cult-like organization, I know many of you would want to know, so what do organizations do? Where do they go from here? And what tends to happen, like I said right at the start, that often the has gotten created because the organization evolved in a particular way. And it's not always intentional. It's just the way the organization finds itself, right? And more often than not, as they infuse new talent at the top of the organization across levels, there is a feeling that we need to change the style. It's not modern, it's not current, it does not speak to the talent that we're trying to bring in on board, and there is a need and a compulsive need. So need needs to be felt oftentimes when the culture does not enable you to achieve what you want to in business. There is a greater heat felt to be able to try addressing culture. I find a whole host of organizations not finding themselves where they want to be in the context of culture, and especially in the context of integrating multi generations of work. This has become a compelling need to be able to create inspiration across levels, and attraction across levels to the agenda of the organization, and to understand how do we really want to go about doing things? How do we align around what we really want, which we're not doing enough? Yeah, what can people do here to be able to, be assured of being able to contribute to high performance? So experiencing this kind of unsettling anxiety around not really having an ecosystem that can support us towards what we're trying to achieve, and create happy organizations, create people who actually believe in the organization and want to contribute, and those who want to stay and make a difference. So diagnosing the problem is extremely important. So people stay because they believe in the mission, or because they fear leaving. It's important to ask what is it that's happening around here. You know what I mean? And I dare say that oftentimes a trigger for going back to the drawing board on culture is the fact that you're not being able to attract the talent you want, and you're not being able to retain the talent you want. And the data is not something that you get from your, I hate to say this, but that's what I seem to be hearing all along, is that the voice of employee is not anymore accurate reflection of the workplace. You often get a lot of this information when people leave. And then again, because people are worried about references, they don't even want to give information in the exit interviews. It's only much later that there is, where you can't solve the problem. You will already have the regrettable losses, that you garner information to know that at the ground level, at different levels, there is a challenge within the organization, and we haven't addressed this in time. So diagnosing the problem, diagnosing the problem is extremely important. Is disagreement seen as betrayal or growth? So the growth piece is so important. And by disagreement, we just simply mean people who want to voice what they don't like. And if there isn't an opportunity to do this freely, it's very, very difficult to take a good hard look in the mirror. And that is the space where a good solid diagnostic, and oftentimes people like myself who come into organizations to be able to help them figure what are the challenges that we are actually experiencing. More importantly, to be able to look at how we want to start the change agenda top down. And if we're not looking at this, it's very difficult to be able to drive any change within organizations unless there is a close, hard look at how we're going to transform the style of leadership. Um, just like the cults get formed because there is obsession around a leader and blind obsession and followership for a leader. In the same way, as you're trying to transition to becoming a solid culture and well-articulated culture, it's very, very important to be able to recognize the influence leaders have in creating a culture by getting them to be able to revisit new mindset, skill sets that they require to create a more modern organization. So if there is a command and control mindset, how do we transition that into an environment of trust and transparency? How do we create new criteria for success within the organization? How do we reward critical thinking and in the context of complexities? And these require transition at the top end of the organization. A very simple adage being that if we did what we did, we'll get what we got. So if we want to change what we get, we got to change what we do. So alluding to the adaptive intelligence of the leaders to be able to drive change. And oftentimes, there are always champions who are around to be able to actually accelerate this process, which is primarily the reason why there was even a reason for change experienced. So leadership transformation is key in this agenda. So I did talk about diagnosing what the problems really are. In this context, this could be problems that you're diagnosing across levels within the organization. There are problems to do with a common understanding on attitudes, on beliefs, on assumptions, on the challenges you might have in terms of priorities, the challenges you might have in terms of rituals within the organization, how meetings are conducted, just a whole host of things. It's everything that falls in the purview of the principles that we uphold as we do business. And so it's a large part of this is to be able to get the leadership to be able to allude to the new way of doing things so that they are role modeling this. It's so important that they sign up to role model what it is that the organization is going to do to drive change. So do we want to trust the process or challenge the process? And then oftentimes, this is the transition you're actually looking for, which is more people who can challenge the process. Radical transparency is extremely important when you're trying to drive culture change, clarifying what the core values might be without driving the cult-like enforcement. Our way or the highway can't be the kind of environment that we're creating. What are our principles? How can we align and live these principles authentically? So rewriting the principles that are going to enable us to be able to manifest the new culture that we need so badly to be able to attract our talent, retain our talent, create a work environment that is conducive to contribution and high performance. I absolutely believe building high EQ leaders in the workplace is extremely important in this journey. We have an ecosystem of education, whether school, college, higher education, the way in which we get jobs, which is very, very, tilted in favor of gauging IQ. It rewards IQ and not EQ. I'm glad to know that at least in the Western world, this is changing fast and furiously to include EQ in the curriculum for young children in school and college. This should easily be something that should be taught to people way before they become adults. So managing mood, okay, using the space between stimulus and response to self-regulate emotions. You're looking for mature leadership. And the good news is that the EQ muscle can be built. It can be built with self-awareness. It can be built by deliberate intentional action. It can be built if you manage your mood. It can be built if you self-regulate emotions. So empathy is really is like a life buoy within the organization. It's like throwing a lifeline to someone within the organization. And having a leader without empathy is the worst experience anyone can have within the organization. So we have ended by rewarding IQ disproportionately. We've ended up having people in very senior positions who don't express empathy. But the empathy muscle can be built. If you don't express empathy, you're not able to manifest empathy. There is a huge challenge in terms of building trust. So we erode trust even further, whereas the organization is already not constructed in favor of building trust. So having high Q leaders is so important to be able to manifest trust across organizations. Rewarding people who demonstrate high EQ is so important. For those on the call who want to know a bit more about this, let me just allude to the fact that, when we bring in people, we want people who are brilliant from great schools, from leading management schools or from leading technology schools, and they all have great scores. Or we want people who are, even if you're getting them from other streams, you want people who have been rankers, who have been really great, or who have high qualifications, which just means that, and there is this bent for bringing people with high qualifications. eh, So, which means that you're bringing in people who are well qualified to do the job. And interestingly, the questions that you will ask at the time of the performance review would be significantly around, does this person have team skills? Right? Does this person communicate well? Does this person share information with transparency? Does this person get along well with his boss? Does this person know how to get along with people who work across different functions? Does this person make an effort for collaboration? How does this person manage conflict? All the questions I asked right now are in the EQ domain, right? Whereas you've brought in people who are very good, have demonstrated, their prowess in the IQ domain. And so it's very interesting how it is that we've created and we find ourselves in this bind. And it's not uncommon to have people in very senior positions not demonstrating adequate EQ. And this itself can be the reason why you can have environments that are toxic. You can have environments which, are not conducive to encouraging employees, are not conducive to creating nurturers and teachers and mentors within the organization. This is a very significant muscle to build within organizations. Rebuilding psychological safety. This is, I know, much repeated and much spoken about. I think it's more spoken about, much like DI, much spoken about, but not really manifested. So, normalizing conflict, which is it's okay to disagree. Yeah, it doesn't mean our relationship has broken down, and it doesn't mean that now we're going to hate each other or we're going to wait to take sweet revenge. We got to grow up as a society around conflict. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to positively disagree. I mean, you have good EQ, you know how to disagree with people without pissing them off. Remove fear-based conversations. It should just be fine to be able to do this. And that's why you need mature leaders who are not generating fear when people want to come in and ask something or they want to offer a suggestion. Most people have decided not to offer any suggestions inside their organizations, which is such a loss. What a colossal loss, having people who don't want to come in and share their ideas. Diversity, influence, and impact. It's just very important to decentralize power within organizations and having a penchant for people who are very different than you are. That is the only way we're going to win in the 21st century, because we have a wide spectrum of people who don't think alike. Because when everyone thinks alike, no one's really thinking. Bringing outside perspectives is so important. So really hiring from domains which are different, not from the same streams. All of this, we need to really grow up. I find the entire space on talent acquisition being extremely uncreative. Yeah, people go out and basically hire the goose for the goose and the gander for the gander. There is such poor experimentation because they want to win the brief and they want to close the position. And so there's least experimentation on both sides. So bringing in outside perspective is a very winning proposition, to not hire people who are exactly the same as the people you already have. So diversity is a really, really big one. Celebrating the evolution and not just the tradition. This is how we always have done things. We got to look again if that's what we end up saying most times. That we're doing this because that's how we do it. Right. And that basically means you have a status quo bias and you want to do things the way you've already done things before, and which is the reason why the organization won't shift the needle. How can we improve on this and share stories on positive change? There needs to be a momentum of sharing stories on positive change within the organization. I know there are a lot of people who ask questions around measures and metrics. Are there mechanisms to be able to measure this? And there are. And you must, in fact, put measures and metrics so that organizations that want to change culture know whether they're on the right track, whether it's a pulse, whether it's exit interviews, whether it's culture champions. Very important to have people who are custodians for this change, who want to measure and manage what is not changing. And exit interviews of people who already left the organization are huge sources of knowing what it is that we could have done differently to be able to keep our culture on track. So building a culture charter is a very significant step in that direction, which is an intentional action to be able to drive culture change, which is by signing up on a charter, which alludes to the preferred attitudes, behaviors, principles, meetings, rituals that the organization upholds. And so that everyone knows what they're signing up for. And leaders sign up to be able to emulate and demonstrate and manifest the culture of the organization with high intention. So there are ways to do this. We do a lot of work in the space of culture charter, building culture, not necessarily only as a strategy for succeeding, but as a key differentiator, is primarily what is already alluded to in the context of leading people and building successful businesses in the 21st century. So I'm going to leave you on that note to be able to reflect on a whole host of things that we just spoke about. A cult demands conformity, a culture fosters belongingness, and I think that's what we really want at this time. We already unfolding the fifth industrial revolution, which is a dance between advanced technology, people, and inclusion. And that is only going to happen if we uphold culture within organizations. So thank you, everyone. Wonderful to have this opportunity to share this with all of you. The recorded version will be available on LinkedIn and YouTube and other places. So do forward this to people who didn't have a chance to be able to attend this today. We will have this in the public domain for sharing this further. Thank you again, and I welcome you to watch the space for more for other talking points conversations. We also have panels and discussions with other experts. So look forward to being able to connect again. This was Talking Points from Capstone People Consulting, and we'll keep this dialogue going. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.